Hello health champions, today we're going to talk about the top 10 signs that your diet is silently destroying your health, and I'm saying silently because a lot of these are going to be a little more subtle than what people associate with suffering and disease, so they kind of sneak up on you. And the first one is that you're always hungry. And why would this be? Well, sugar and processed foods that we get in a bad diet, they very often result in blood sugar swings, and your body doesn't work very well with swings. It wants things to be stable. So if we think about your blood sugar, it wants your blood sugar in a very narrow range. But when you eat sugar and processed starches and now processed foods, your blood sugar is going to swing wildly outside this range, and if it goes super high, it's going to come down crashing very fast, and for a lot of people it's going to come down a little bit below where it's supposed to be, and that's where you get hungry. And then if your blood sugar is low and you get hungry, you're going to eat more of the same stuff that caused the problem, so then you go up and down, and you're getting frequently hungry. But there's another way this works too, because processed foods is depleted food. So the reason we want to eat food is because it gives us certain things, and we're looking for fuel that we can turn into energy with the addition of oxygen. Then we're looking for building blocks that we can turn into tissue. And that's proteins, essential amino acids, and good fats, essential fatty acids. And of course we also need fat for fuel. And then we also are looking for catalysts, and those are the vitamins and minerals that make all the reactions in the body move forward. And if we eat real unprocessed foods, then it's going to contain all those things that the body is looking for, and it's going to contain them in a certain ratio or quantity. So if we imagine the amount of food or the amount of calories in this food, then it's going to have a corresponding amount of nutrients. We'll put an N there for nutrient, and this would be the essential amino acids, the essential fatty acids, the vitamins and the minerals, and so forth. But if we eat processed foods now for the same amount of calories now, we're only getting a fraction of the nutrients in there, and the rest is going to be missing. So this is a deficiency. The body was looking for this much, it only got that much. So what happens? Obviously you get hungry. So with the processed food, there's a lack of nutrients. The body isn't getting what it was looking for, and therefore it's going to make you eat more to compensate. It says, I got this many calories, I expected this many nutrients, I only get that much, now eat some more. So we get all the nutrients that we want, and over time of course that can result in poor health if the body isn't getting the components it's looking for. Then it's not going to work as well. The problem of course is that this takes years or even decades before it becomes a real problem. So very often we don't realize there's a problem, or we don't associate it, because there's so many young healthy people who are doing just fine on junk food. And for example, when I was an athlete in my 20s, and even when I competed in the Olympics, I ate way too much processed foods, but it didn't catch up with me yet. Number two is the cravings are controlling you, and that's kind of similar to hunger, but it's still very different, because this is more about why you're eating. And if you ask yourself and you're super honest about it, then you will figure this out. And if you're eating because your body has certain needs, and you're eating to provide these building blocks and the fuel and all the nutrients and resources that your body needs, now you have a hunger for food, and this is real food that contains all those things your body is looking for. But more and more people eating to change how they feel, and if that's the primary reason that you're eating, if you're feeling sad or agitated or upset or bored, for a lot of people, and you're eating to change how you feel, then your food is acting more like a drug. So we have to ask ourselves why we're eating. What's the reason that we want to put something in our mouths? Because the processed food manufacturers are well aware of this. There's something called dopamine hijacking, where dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a brain chemical that changes how we feel, and manufacturers know this because by design there are entire industries out there to make food additives and chemicals and put things in food to change how we feel, to turn these foods into drugs, and that's part of why these processed foods are so addictive. But another interesting way that very few people realize that it's even possible is that if you eat something like sugar or some processed starch, or this could also be in combination with antibiotics or anything that disrupts your gut flora, then you could get dysbiosis, an imbalance in the gut bacteria, and then the sugar feeds selective pathogenic friendly bacteria. All of a sudden you have these super cravings, and they may not be your cravings, but your brain interprets it that way anyway. So the emotional eating is a very real thing. But the question is, how did that start? Where did it start? Was it that we had an emotion, we felt sad, we felt bored, and then we were looking for some food to change how we felt? Or was it that we had some kind of food that changed our emotion, that changed how we felt, and now we learn to depend on food to change those emotions? Well, I'm going to argue for the second one. I'm going to argue that it's the processed foods and the food chemicals that create the emotion, and then it entrains this pattern and creates a vicious cycle for us. And why would I say that? Because your ancestors didn't have this processed food to change the emotion, they only had real food. And it's not to say that real food won't change how you feel, because it can be very pleasurable to eat a nice meal. But the question is, what's the starting point? Is it that you're feeling bad that makes you want to eat? And is that the primary reason that you're eating? Number three is that you wake up tired, and this is especially if you feel like you've spent enough hours in the bed, but you may not be getting the quality of sleep that you should. You may not be getting the different phases. You may not spend enough time in deep sleep or in REM sleep, and then that could affect you because you're not feeling fully rested. And actually blood sugar swings again could have something to do with this, because when you have blood sugar swings, and like we talked about on the low end of that, now you get a cortisol release. So if you have blood sugar swings, you're going to get cortisol swings, and if This happens even a little bit at night. Now this cortisol is going to shut off the melatonin, which is your sleep hormone, and this makes sense because cortisol is a stress hormone. It's there to make you very alert in an emergency, and obviously in an emergency you don't want to sleep, so if these two hormones are doing different things, then cortisol is going to override the melatonin. Another way poor food can affect sleep is that magnesium and B vitamins are required for making melatonin and to be able to go into deep sleep, so if you eat processed foods very often they're going to be missing magnesium and B vitamins, one of the most common things that are deficient. And another thing to keep in mind is that serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, is a precursor for melatonin. Is a chemical that becomes melatonin, and if we have screwed up our guts with a bunch of processed foods and other factors, of course 90% or more of the serotonin is made by our gut bacteria, so if our gut isn't working we may not be making the serotonin needed to make melatonin, and now we can't sleep properly either. Number 4 is stubborn weight, and like we talked about before, if we eat poor quality food which messes with blood sugar, has few nutrients, then that will tend to cause overeating, and obviously overeating causes weight gain. But one more thing that this works against you is through insulin resistance, because when you eat sugar and when you overeat, now that's the recipe for insulin resistance, and insulin is a fat storing hormone, so when you eat an excess of food, the excess gets turned into fat and gets stored on your body, and insulin is the hormone that does that. But it doesn't even stop there, it's like a double whammy, because insulin is fat storing and it prevents fat burning, so now you can't break it down either. The fat sits there for a future date when you run out of food, but that day never comes, and now you get super hungry because you can't get that food back, that energy back, so your body starts wanting to eat some more instead. And unfortunately most people have bought into the idea of calories, that it's all about the calories, so they eat foods that create unstable energy, and then because of the vitamin C lack, and then now you get a little bit of a bleed, but it doesn't stop bleeding, so now you form that bruise very easily. And once more, I'm just amazed at the wisdom of the body and how everything support each other, because the microbiome, the healthy bacterial flora, actually produces a significant portion of your vitamin K. Sign number 9 would be increasing blood pressure, and the number one reason for that is that you have insulin resistance, because with high levels of insulin that increases the amount of sodium that the kidneys reabsorb, so the normal function for the kidneys is to filter out the equivalent of hundreds of bottles of water every day, but then you reabsorb something like 99.5% of that, so that when you go to the bathroom you only pee out like 1 or 2 bottles a day. But if you have insulin resistance now, instead of 99.5, that might increase to 99.6, and even though that's just a tiny little difference, that's going to keep more fluid in the body and water, and so sodium always follow along. So if you have too much fluid in the body, that's going to increase the blood pressure. So processed foods is the number one reason for insulin resistance, but processed foods do a lot more, so they produce advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, which are those proteins that get sugar stuck to them, which damages the tissues. You get R-reactive oxygen species, which is basically free radicals or excess free radicals. You get inflammation, and processed foods also have very little magnesium, and processed foods also contribute to dysbiosis or gut imbalance. So what all of these have in common is that they affect the function of the blood vessel, that's called endothelial dysfunction. So the blood vessel is not just a tube, it's not like this PVC pipe where fluids just passively flow through. The blood vessel is alive, it has muscles in the wall, so it can contract, constrict to increase blood pressure, or it can dilate to lower blood pressure, and the body regulates this all the time because it determines how much blood is flowing to the different parts of the body. But if you have endothelial dysfunction, that means that the blood vessels don't work properly, they don't regulate the flow and the blood pressure properly, and overall they tend to stiffen, which would mean that blood pressure goes up. So that's another factor that contributes to high blood pressure. So we need to understand that sodium plays a role in high blood pressure, but it's not like you've been told. It's not a primary role, it's a secondary role. So I know that wherever you go, the first thing you're told about blood pressure is to cut back on the sodium, but a healthy person, a healthy body knows how to regulate sodium. It knows even if you eat 3 times as much sodium, your body can get rid of it, because it's a very easy mechanism if your body is healthy. So in other words, it's not the sodium, it's you have to get unhealthy first, and then your body becomes unable to regulate the sodium, and now you have a problem. Sign number 10 would be that you seem to catch every cold and flu that comes around, and there are many reasons for that. We'll go through these. One would be that if you're low in zinc, vitamin C and selenium, you might catch a lot more colds, because these are necessary for white blood cell function, and white blood cells, that's the cellular component of your immune system, that's the mobile, the circulating portion. And if you eat a lot of sugar, of course sugar suppresses white blood cells. Who is surprised at this point? I don't think we've ever found anything good about sugar, and if your bad diet causes a weak gut or an unbalanced gut, now you're going to have a weak immunity as well, because 70% of your immune system resides in the gut. It's called GT, gut-associated lymph tissue, and that makes sense because everything that you put into your body needs a barrier. It needs to be shielded from your body, it needs to be processed before it's allowed in, and that's what the GT does. And when it comes to immune system, we absolutely have to talk about the brain and stress. So if you do have a bad diet that can influence the brain, like we talked about, unstable blood sugar is unstable energy for the brain, and if you don't get the proper essential fatty acids, you can't build the proper cell membranes. But we need To understand how fundamental the role of stress is to the functioning of the body, so anytime that you have stress your body is trying to defend itself. There's some sort of emergency that needs dealing with right now, and when you have a stress response to something, then your body is allocating more resources to deal with that right now, and that means it's allocating less resources to something else. So whenever you have a stress response, you're going to turn off or reduce the amount of resources going to your internal organs. That means your digestion and your immune system and your reproduction and your DNA repair and your healing, they're just not that important in that moment when you have an emergency. And that's why stress is so critical for us to understand and do something about. So anytime that you have a stress response, when you have increased stress, that means that you have fewer resources allocated to your immune system, and we need to understand that a stress response is necessary. You wouldn't survive if you couldn't respond to different stresses, but the question is how long does it keep going and how strong it is, and that's the brain that determines. You're supposed to have the stress response, but the brain is supposed to control the magnitude and control the length of it. So if you have a well-working brain, then it will be a lesser magnitude and shorter duration, so stress doesn't control you. So the brain is critical in that aspect. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one, and if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.